Buyer fatigue is a real thing. The more houses you walk through, the more they kind of start to blur together. Similar kitchen, similar layout, similar updates, and kind of without realizing it, you start to be a little less diligent in the things that you're looking out for, which is totally understandable, but that can sometimes be an expensive mistake to make. I find it incredibly beneficial to have a sort of checklist, something to kind of run down quick before I step into a house at a showing, to just make sure that everything is being accounted for. I'm talking about appliances, mechanicals, your furnace, your water heater, the overall craftsmanship, all killer, no filler, everything important. Let's go. What is up? My name is Paul Winkleman. I am a realtor here in the Twin Cities. I work on the To the Twin Cities team. This channel, this video, it's all about helping first-time home buyers, helping better understand the pretty overwhelming process that is buying a home. If you have any questions or want to say what's up or want to make fun of me, you can send me an email, paul@tothetwincities.com. You can text me, Instagram. I have a website where you can reach out to me from, any of that. I promise no matter what you use, you will get a hold of me. And yeah, that's kind of it. I appreciate you watching this video. We're gonna get straight into it. I do have a video I previously put out on my channel, similar vibe. However, it's about the exterior of the home. Now we are stepping inside. We're going into the home. I will put some type of cheat sheet or checklist in the description on this video in case you want to save this and, you know, use it, have it as a refresher when you're looking at homes. Number one on my list, this is in no particular order, starting with appliances. Like most everything in your home, appliances not super cheap to replace, not really a fun thing to have to replace if you don't want to. So things to keep in mind when you're looking at appliances: make note of the age. If you can see that anywhere, make note of the brand. Obviously, there are some more reputable brands as opposed to some others. You might hear that more budget brands, if they're anywhere from like 10 to 15 years, they can start to be a little bit more inefficient at that point, maybe nearing the end of its life. That's not to say at 15 years that your fridge is just going to immediately break. It's kind of just more of a good guideline to have in the back of your head so you can, you know, better anticipate when that repair or fix or, you know, needing to buy a new one will happen. It's just good to make note of that, keep an eye on the age so you can kind of anticipate that failing at some point and being a little more prepared for that. And also make note if the brands are mismatched. That's not inherently a bad thing, but it can mean that one of them was replaced more recently than the others. So you could have a brand new dishwasher, but the fridge is super old, maybe on its way out. And yeah, just kind of getting a good visual, get some eyes on everything. I think it's important, if you can, to try and like listen to how the actual machine is running. Obviously you can't like start the dishwasher during a showing, but you can listen to the fridge and the freezer and see if they're like rattling or grinding or making like excessive humming noises. When I am looking at a fridge or a dishwasher or near the sink, kind of anywhere around water, always looking on the floor or behind the appliance if you can, to just look for any water stains. Maybe the floorboards are warped underneath there or discolored or something. All can be signs of either age or like improper plumbing. As far as the stove and the oven go, pretty easy to tell, you know, kind of just the general age and condition. Pop open the oven door, see what's going on in there. If it's clean, cool. If it's dirty, then it's dirty, probably older. I'll say that maybe some buyers will turn on a gas stovetop if it's there. Not under my suggestion or under my knowledge or anything like that. I've personally never seen that in person, but maybe there's people out there that do that just to make sure that maybe all the heating elements are burning evenly. None of them are not firing or something like that. But you for sure did not hear that from me. And then moving on to like your washer and dryer, I think the internet will tell you anything over 10 years to use caution, which may be true. Again, I'll probably say this a million times. Just because they say 10 years does not mean at 10 years it's just going to out on you. But for the washer and dryer, checking the age if you can kind of look and see the seals on the doors. Stick your head in there and give it a whiff, see if it smells like musty and old. The dryer vent should be metal and not flexible, not like flexible foil. 10 times out of 10, that gets called out in an inspection. It's not the end of the world. It is a fire hazard, but again, nothing too crazy. So overall, all these appliances can be anywhere from $1,000 for like a cheap dishwasher up to like $8,000 plus for like matching new appliances. It's not cheap, so it is important to get some eyes on this. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be an expert on any of this stuff. I think everyone out there is pretty smart. We're all smart people. You can catch a real sense of the condition of something just by looking at it, opening it up. And I also think that little issues with like appliances or just like overall kind of not the best condition, I think that can foreshadow maybe like how the property was maintained, or even more so make you wonder, what about the things I can't see? If like the fridge is toast and it's a mess, like, well, what's going on inside like the plumbing or something like that? Okay, number 2 on the list. This one's kind of near and dear to my heart as a mostly former woodworker, DIY head, house flipper kind of guy. I like to say the Paul of all trades. Anyways, craftsmanship is kind of a pretty big overall term, because when I say craftsmanship, I mean like baseboards, crown molding, door trim, window trim, the floors, the paint job. How do the caulking lines look? Are the outlet covers straight or are they crooked? Are the doors closing properly or are they rubbing against the frame, signifying that they are out of square? So many things, right? And especially in like flips or renovations, this is where you kind of want to be a little cautious. I'm all for the DIY stuff. Like I said, I've done a lot of it, and for sure it hasn't all looked great. I've definitely been a part of putting up a crooked outlet plate, and like it is a tough look, but it's hard, you know? Those kind of small things, they don't necessarily mean that it's bad or you should be scared or run away, but it definitely makes you kind of like, you know, signals the flags a bit and say like, okay, if I'm noticing a lot of these little things all around, I'm gonna keep my eyes open and like anticipate that I will find some kind of goofy stuff. And again, just to kind of like hammer this point home, if like the easy stuff, the more visual DIYable stuff, if that was done sloppy or you could tell that it was done in a time crunch, what is that gonna say? More of like the bones of the home. Again, yeah, like the things that you can't see. Other things I'm looking for as far as like the overall craftsmanship, something that I bring up to all my buyers is making note of like if there's especially one wall painted and it's not like an accent wall, it's just this one has fresh paint, nothing else does, or like just this one ceiling. Sometimes it's the whole room. But if you see something like that, I do think that's grounds to be like, should we worry about this? Is that weird? Did they just paint this wall? Certainly in some cases, yeah, they did just paint that wall, but especially like those smaller, patchier paint jobs, like the corner of a ceiling, or sometimes in the basement, you'll see like a lower third, you know, maybe like 3 feet high, 4 feet wide, just like a chunk that's painted, and you're like, okay, well, what happened there? Again, a lot of this stuff, you don't have to be a professional. And sure, like maybe when you first start looking at homes, this stuff, it totally can and probably will feel super foreign, but that's okay. The more houses you look at, the more familiar you'll get with everything, like very quickly. It's kind of crazy how much you can learn even in one day if you look at 2 sick houses, one that's kind of fine, and then like a busted house. From there, I feel like you really feel like you have your footing and you're like, okay, I've seen like the range now. I know what good looks like. I know where it's priced at. I do understand now why this one was on the market for so long and is super, you know, budget friendly. And also that is why I maintain that just look at the house. I'm telling you, I think if you're working with somebody who's like discouraging you from looking at houses, unless there's a huge serious red flag, things like that are usually noted somewhere for your agent to read. But I think by not looking at every home that you're interested in, you're just kind of like, it's only hurting yourselves. your agent, if they're the one discouraging you, they're like holding you back from honestly being like a better, smarter buyer. Okay, and my last thing on the craftsmanship, if you care to, I think making like a mental checklist of all the, suspect things you see in the house can be helpful. If you're seeing like, 1 to 2 or 3 like minor cosmetic issues, I would say no problem. That stuff's out there kind of in every home. If you're seeing, 5 to 10 small sloppy details, you can start to be like, okay, sure, I'm like, noted, maybe a little bit of caution, but then, kind of anything over that, sloppiness, for lack of a better term, everywhere. That's where it's safe to, start stepping back a little bit. Maybe start wondering what's going on beyond the cosmetic things that you can see. Okay, and now I guess number 3, we are moving on to mechanicals. Different than appliances, mechanicals being the more scary looking and scary costing. Of the two, these are like the core systems of your home. Furnace or boiler, depending on what heat source you have, your water heater, water softener if you've got one, your electrical. We're gonna even piggyback the plumbing into the major mechanicals. These are like, these are the big boys. These are the most expensive to repair, arguably more essential to just general comfort and even safety. If these major mechanical systems fail, depending on what it is, it can actually like cause some further damage if it's not corrected quickly. Whereas if your fridge goes out, I mean, that sucks for sure. You're going to be losing some food, and that is expensive to fix. But I think a little more manageable than when your furnace inevitably goes out during the coldest week of the year and you're without heat for X amount of time. So, the furnace or the boiler, what are we looking out for? First of all, always checking the age. Manufacturer will say like 15 to 20 years ballpark. If you're pushing that 20 years, definitely could be towards the end of its lifespan. Again, not to say at 20 years it's going to shit out on you, but it is kind of a good guideline measure to follow. Some furnaces are cheap and they will just give out way early. Some will go for way longer than they should. They have no business being 30 years old and still kicking out heat, but that can be a thing, especially boilers. Boilers always look older and usually are like an older machine, but I've seen boilers from the 60s through the 80s that I swear are still kicking out hot water, running it through the radiators, and yeah, heating the house. If you end up with a furnace or a boiler like that, consider yourself lucky because in general, yes, they will crap out around that 15 to 20 year mark. Age is very important. It does tell a lot, but also visually, you can look for rust or corrosion. Just like the fridge, you can listen to it run. There's a good chance that if it's cold out and the furnace is on, it will kick on at some point during your showing. So lean in, just kind of get a listen, see if there's any weird clanking or banging or grinding or extra loud humming, anything like that. Also, again, you didn't hear this from me. I have heard stories of buyers taking a little peek at the furnace filter. Sometimes that can say a lot about the home. That's a pretty easy thing to maintain, and it's something that you do pretty frequently. So if you're seeing a home that has neglected that, again, it's one of those things where if that's not in the best shape, well, what about like other things that I can't see? Again, you didn't hear that from me though. I've never seen it. I've never told anybody to do it. And then my last thought on the heat for boilers, I mentioned checking for like rust and corrosion on the furnace. Same thing with the boiler, even more so because it's hot water. So checking all the pipes and the connections for corrosion or rust, that can, obviously just be a sign of age, maybe a sign that things are failing. So very important. Furnace is like always like one of the top 3 major expenses. Every single house I'm in, I make note, I'll tell my buyers, hey, the furnace is this old, probably to the point of annoyance, but I think it's very important. The age of the furnace or any of these major mechanicals often gets brought up when like negotiating starts happening and things like that, or even prior to the offer. So yeah, knowing the age and the condition, very important, very beneficial to you as a buyer. Okay, and now we are sliding on over to the water heater, probably going to be right next to or very close to the furnace in the basement. Water heaters, they say an average lifespan of 8 to 12 years. Again, not going to necessarily die at 12 years. Could go before. Some can last for 20 some years. It's crazy. Things to look out for. Again, rust, corrosion. This is moving water directly out of the top of the unit on most models, coming out of the top. So looking for, yeah, rust, corrosion at those points and throughout the pipe. Any signs of leaking on the ground near it. 99.9% of water heaters I see have a copper pipe that comes off the side and has no fitting or anything on the bottom. It's just open. That's the temperature and pressure release valve discharge pipe, and it's often a dead giveaway as to kind of the age or the condition of the water heater. Older ones will almost always have a bunch of like patina and rust around the bottom of that pipe. So that's something very important to get your eyes on, unless I beat you to it, which I probably will. And then one last kind of like pretty cool hack that you can use when you're looking at water heaters. They all have a temperature gauge on the bottom, and it will tell you like kind of where the suggested running temp is at. As water heaters age and start to be less efficient, you'll find yourself having to turn up the temperature to like compensate. So when you're looking at a water heater, if the temp is cranked all the way up to like extremely hot, but the water that's coming out is just normal hot, again, y'all are smart enough. I think you can put 2 and 2 together. And the biggest thing about a water heater going out, not only do you have cold water, cold showers, not everybody's favorite, but depending on the time of year, if they fail suddenly in the winter, it always kind of opens up an opportunity for some weird damage to potentially happen in the plumbing. So you don't want to get caught slipping. You want to make sure you know what's going on with your water heater. And I did mention the electrical panel as well as the overall plumbing. For the electrical panel, we're not electricians, but we're gonna pop that sucker open. You're basically looking for, you know, maybe an inspection date. There's usually a sticker on there. Anything semi-recent, thumbs up, that's a good sign. You know that someone has at least been in there, kind of poked around a little bit. Things to maybe look out for though, missing breakers. Sometimes there's just open slots in the panel. No bueno. If it just looks messy, if the wiring coming out looks messy, if it's not labeled correctly, you'll get a sense of like what looks chaotic and also what looks antique versus like what's a clean, nice panel. And also, I'll always even touch the breakers, because if the circuit's overloading, those breakers will actually get hot, and then that can just show some fault in the electrical. This is pretty obvious, but if you're smelling burning, like an electrical burn, that is not a good sign. Plumbing, biggest thing you're looking for is like what type of material it's made out of. You may see anything from PVC to copper to PEX or galvanized steel. Just looking for visible corrosion, any leaks. If you see updated plumbing, that's a good sign. If they're using, you know, PVC, like a more modern material, that's always good. It just shows that, hey, they've been in here somewhat recently and like addressed some of the plumbing. And then lastly, on the mechanicals that you'll find in the basement is a water softener. Not everyone has a water softener. They're very common here in Minnesota, but not every house has them here. We have hard water in Minnesota. What water softeners do is essentially pull out the minerals that cause the water to feel hard. And then when the water comes back out, it's a little softer, less minerally. I don't know if that's a word. Also, I'm not a water softener pro. That's my third grade level understanding of them. But just kind of checking that out, seeing if there's salt in the actual tank. If there's not, kind of shows signs of being neglected, or maybe that it doesn't even work. And then again, looking for rust stains, any sign of like leakage or weird corrosion going on. The thing about a water softener is that, especially if you've had one in place, if they fail or if you just no longer use it, it's probably not the end of the world, but in certain cases, that hard water can and will be harder on your overall plumbing, and it can just cause issues to come up, you know, in other places due to the hard water. And then at this point in this showing that we're in the basement, most likely. The basement is of utmost importance to be looking at in the house. Basements do take a pretty brutal beating in Minnesota. I know I've said that on this channel before. Between the freeze thaw cycles, heavy rain in the spring, the snow melt, moisture. It's very easy for moisture to eventually work its way through the walls and start causing efflorescence on the foundation, on the interior foundation. Super common, but definitely a sign of an aging foundation. And also moisture penetration through the walls. And I will say there's definitely some truth to, like, if your basement has issues, your house has issues. What are we looking for when we're in the basement? We're looking at first peeking the walls. Hopefully there's not a bunch of stuff covering the walls. That can also be a red flag. Maybe they're hiding something. But on the walls, we're looking for specifically horizontal cracking, especially if it's a block foundation. Horizontal cracking is like the red flag. That's the worst. That's what you don't want to see. Less serious would be the step down cracks, which just kind of like follow the pattern of the brick of the blocks. From those horizontal cracks, we can kind of deduce that the wall is being pushed out from the outside, from the soil, and causing this crack to start, aka your walls are caving in, essentially, to put it as scary as I could. Any sign of cracking just shows movement. And again, I mentioned the efflorescence. Guaranteed you're gonna see that in a basement at some point. It can be not serious. It can also be very serious. I think it just depends on the amount in which it's present. I actually used to live in an apartment that was ground level. And one wall in my apartment was like brick, super cool, but it was efflorescence everywhere. And that wasn't even touching any soil. That was just moisture coming through from probably rain and like a lack of sunlight. Maybe that's irrelevant, but you know, it does happen even in situations where you think it wouldn't. Earlier, I mentioned, you know, fresh paint on one wall. Sometimes in the basement, fresh paint can be a little shady. Typically, probably not. You can just assume that they wanted to, you know, zhuzh it up before they put it on the market. But sometimes it can be like the paint can look good, but if the actual wall looks pretty scary, I think it's kind of a case by case, especially if it's just like one wall or, like I mentioned earlier, just a little patch somewhere. Probably not ideal. But what's like normal scary versus like alarming scary? I would say small vertical hairline cracks, normal settling, essentially not an issue. The horizontal cracks, that's showing like signs of soil pressure. So a little more, maybe some flags getting thrown up at that point. And then, like I mentioned, the multiple step down cracking, that can signify potential movement coming from more than one direction, which is definitely more on the serious end of things. Outside of the cracks, we are looking for water intrusion. Again, the efflorescence can play a role in that, but also certain corners. It's always like the northeast corner or something of a home. In the spring, it'll get wet a little bit, but it's never a big issue. But you can see that stuff. If it's not painted, there's always visibly like a color change over there, and it just looks a little darker and dingier. Most commonly, you'll see this where the walls and the floors meet in the basement. In this little 90 right there is where a lot of water is gonna show. Also, rust on the base of the furnace or the water softener. Sometimes that's due to those mechanicals. Sometimes that can be due to past water getting into the basement. I think it's good to catch an overall whiff of the basement too. If you're getting musty, you know, like dank smells, that's probably because there's been some moisture in the basement somewhat recently. If they have a dehumidifier that's running, not inherently bad, but they're definitely working on some type of moisture control. So, and then when we're looking at the floor, like the slab itself, if it's not covered with some type of flooring, big things to look out for. You probably will see some cracks. And again, hairline cracks, pretty normal. It's when you start seeing cracks that are bigger than like a quarter inch, that's when you can start to be a little more cautious. Other things to look out for: if parts of it are heaving or there's uneven floors in the basement, looking for signs of previous patching over maybe past cracks that were in the floor. Hairline slab cracks are pretty normal. It's when they're moving or separating that it starts to get a little worrisome. We're always looking at the beams and the posts and the floor joists when we're in the basement, if they're visible, making sure those posts are straight. Sometimes you'll see temporary jacks in basements. Honestly, a lot of the time you'll see a temporary jack. We're looking for significant cracking in any of the main beams as well as the floor joists. If you're looking at floor joists and you see the original and then maybe they have like another 2x6 or another piece of newer wood screwed to that, that's called sistering. That's actually like, you'd prefer to see that than not. That shows that maybe those floor joists were starting to crack or weaken. And by sistering a new piece of wood on there, really tightens it up, brings it back to better strength. So definitely looking for that. Basement DIY remodels, pretty notorious for some weird framing and structural things. So if it's a basement like that, be on extra alert, keep your eyes extra open. And why is all this stuff about the basement so important? Because it's crazy expensive to fix. Because in some cases, foundation repairs can be uncomfortably expensive. A person could guesstimate anywhere between 5 to 15 grand if your basement needed like reinforcement, somewhere in the ballpark of 20,000 plus if you need new walls, if the walls have to get rebuilt, and that's all before the cosmetic repairs even. Definitely important. Also, foundation issues don't like stay the same, they just get worse over time. There's only so much you can do to mitigate an issue before you just have to bite the bullet and fix it. So when you're in the basement, does it smell dry? Do the walls look shady? How are the floors doing? Looking at the framing itself, trying to see if there's any signs of past water. In general, especially after you see a couple basements, I think you'll know the ones that make you feel uneasy, and if they do, trust your instinct. Don't disregard the importance of your foundation. Well, sick, that's all I've got for this video. I appreciate you so much if you're still watching, and I will catch you on the next video.